Mr. Blair, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Well, the first question is, you are here, you came back just a few hours ago. What do you think about the situation right now?
I think it's a horrible situation, and I've been doing this role for quite a few years now, and I can't remember being more anxious about the situation. So, I think there's a short-term issue and a longer-term issue. The short-term issue, obviously, is how we change the existing situation with rockets coming out of Gaza and then the retaliation going into Gaza. And then in the longer term, we've got to look at what are the underlying problems here and how we do.
Now, if you were or you are the Prime Minister, for example, of Israel right now, these days, and millions of your citizens are being rocketed every single day from the Gaza Strip, what would you do?
I mean, it's not for me to give advice to the Israeli Prime Minister, obviously, but what I always say to people in the international community is, understand that Israel is a democracy. Its political leaders come under the pressures that all of us would face and have faced when you're subject to terrorist attacks. So, I mean, I think without specifying exactly the methods and means by which he should proceed, because he will know that far better than me, I think there are two things that are very clear. The first is obviously you've got to create a situation in which the rockets stop coming out of Gaza, in which you create some sort of calm for Israeli people and also for the Palestinians who will get caught up in this. I mean, there's many civilian deaths as well on the Palestinian side, and we shouldn't forget this. But in the longer term, we've got to deal with the underlying problem here, which is a separation between Gaza and West Bank, and a separation on the basis that Hamas, that is still committed to using violence and refusing to accept the existence of Israel, are in charge of Gaza and able to both to mount these attacks. And then, you don't want to be in a situation where 2 years further down the line you're back into another repetition. And I think the Israeli leadership is very well aware of that.
So you accept the equation saying Israel can't continue living with those rockets, these rockets falling on its citizens?
There's no democratic politician that could carry on in office if millions of his citizens were living in fear and taking shelter every night. The question is, though, how then do you get to the point where you can get some sort of framework in place to resolve the longer-term issues? And it's important also to recognize that...
That was my next question to you.
What would that be?
What is the way out, or what are the modalities that can be used as a way out of this crisis?
I mean, I think there are two important factors here, I think. The first is that, in the end, we have to create a situation in which Hamas either change the basic positions that they have, or where it is clear that the whole process can't be beholden to what they're doing and to their ability to create these circumstances in which then you get a conflagration and then everyone is in a difficult position. Of course, I've just come from the West Bank, and on the Palestinian side, of course, everything looks very different. Yeah. It's important to understand that. So,
are they angry?
They are angry, because what happens is you will inevitably...
Really angry?
Yes, I think there is real anger, but the important thing always in politics is how do you channel that anger into something that allows us a way forward. But what happens inevitably, we've gone through this situation many times in my own country faced with terrorism, since we had a long history of being faced with it. What happens is that when you take the action that you consider necessary in order to defeat the terrorism, inevitably there are people that get caught up in it. And so, people work for me, were just telling me this morning about
Northern Ireland crisis.
Yeah,
you solved it, didn't you?
We did in the end, although it's constant work in progress. But we went through many years, decades of failed initiatives, failed peace talks.
Are you ready to mediate here?
He's trying.
Look, I continue to do everything I can, and will do.
In this current crisis.
I do anything again. Anything I
did you offer the Prime Minister, for example, Netanyahu, your services in breaking a deal?
No, I don't. That's not the way I operate here. I don't come in and start grandstanding, and I tend to work behind the scenes and so on. But of course, I will be discussing with him, with the leadership on the Palestinian side. And the other point I was going to make is I think the regional players are also important. I think the role of Egypt in this will be hugely important.
I want to ask you something about what Israelis feel when regarding the Europeans. And always the feeling is that Europeans say, yeah, well, we condemn the rockets that fall on your heads. But there is always a but following. Why can't the Europeans say, we condemn it strongly and that's it, with no buts following?
Right, and it's just important to understand the pressures they come under as well within their own politics, because obviously the Palestinian side will be pointing to what happens in Gaza, which is inevitable in these situations. When you get the retaliation, you get innocent civilians that lose their lives. And then, you have the Iron Dome, which is a huge protection for you. You've also got a situation, I often say this to Europeans, because Israel has in place within schools, for example, very quick systems of evacuating people fast, getting them into shelters, you will minimize your casualties that way. But if you weren't taking those avoiding actions, or you didn't have the Iron Dome in place, of course, you would be suffering major casualties. So, I think part of it is for the Europeans, and by the way, people complain about this, not just in Israel, but elsewhere. We faced a situation in Ireland where people constantly say to us, don't do this and don't do that. Then we'd say, look, you're not living in the real world. So I understand that.
It seems that the Europeans lost their ability to play the role of a mediator, or to play a meaningful role in settling down conflicts in the Middle East. Do you think that it's really important for the European Union, the European community, to be really involved in peacemaking in the Middle East?
I think it is important that we do that, because we have Europe has a major, it's part of the quartet, we have a major role in the Middle East, but you can only do that if you have the trust of both sides.
Yeah, well, and now,
That's difficult.
By the way, peace process, I would like to ask you, if Israel has a lot of problems maintaining its legitimacy for actions in the West Bank, in Gaza, do you think that if we had now a peace process, ongoing peace process, it would be easier?
I think it would be easier if you have a process that is, if it's credible, because I think that then sucks some of the political energy that otherwise goes to the extremes. It gets it located in a process. And look, my attitude all the way through is you're only ever going to get peace here when a combination of things happens. You've got to have, yes, a political negotiation, but I personally don't believe the root of this problem is around whether the border goes in this space or that. I mean, these are important issues, but I think
so who would you blame now for us being in a stagnation and the peace process is
one of the first things you learn if you're trying to play a role is don't put too much blame around. But the other thing I was going to say is I personally think until you create the conditions in which a peace process can succeed, it's very hard to have one. The attitude that I have to this issue is different today than probably when I was Prime Minister, because I come here once or twice a month. I usually do it under the radar, not above the radar, but I'm always absorbing the situation, and you can see it in a much clearer way when you come here a lot than if you look at it from the outside. And my sense is that, contrary to what I would have thought when I was Prime Minister, it isn't actually just a question of putting the parties in a room. It's a question of, one, for the Israelis, can you create conditions in which they genuinely believe a Palestinian state will be secure for them, right? Which is the big.
And you need leaders for that.
You need leaders and institutions. You need people to really feel that they're safe. And for the Palestinians, sorry, just to put the other side of it, for the Palestinians, they've got to feel that their lives are going to get better.
I must ask you, in the light of the kidnapping of the 3 boys and the murdering of them, it seems that President Abbas played an unusual role in this scene. All of a sudden, he expressed dismay about the kidnapping. Do you think it is an opening for a renewal or a new trust between the leaders?
Well, I hope so.
You think it might help?
I think it does help, and I think it's important to recognize when he did that. I mean, that was for him a big step. Now, we look at the kidnapping and killing of 3 youngsters. I mean, not specifically about the words that he used, but the kidnapping and killing of the 3 youngsters obviously horrified everybody, but he's also got the situation where the young Palestinian was killed in an horrific way too. So he's under a lot of internal pressure, of course, to be there with his people. So I think the fact that he did that is important, but you're only going to get back to some sort of dialogue once the situation is calmed, and I don't think this time round with Gaza, the situation can be calmed unless it's clear that the calm has got some, solid basis.
Right.
Mr. Blair, we are out of time. Unfortunately, we could talk with you, I guess, in 1 hour, but I have 2 short questions. One, on a personal matter, you were here when you heard the sirens, and I wonder, what did you do when you hear what do you do when you hear the sirens here in Israel when you are here? And the other one is, do you believe it's maybe time, perhaps it's the time to destroy totally, to go in Gaza and destroy the Hamas regime there?
This is 2 rather different
I
questions.
know.
I mean, on the first start, look, you gave me a British cup of tea today, so that's fine. Provided the British have a cup of tea, nothing troubles them very much. So that's the answer to the first question.
You're not afraid, you're saying?
No, look, no. I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
The answer to the second is, look, you've got to. There won't be a destruction of Hamas unless you won't destroy Hamas as a political entity. Can you destroy Hamas as a movement that kills innocent people deliberately? Can you shift them from that? I don't know. But what I do know is that will only happen if it happens within the context of a way forward, particularly for the people of Gaza, that gives them some hope for the future. Because in the end, it's not, a political movement like that has support. It has support on the ground, and you need to shift them and take away that support. So it's not a question of, simply military means can get you so far. But
this question, I must ask you a question. What do you think of the present dissemination of the fanatic militant Islam in the region now? Is there a way out of this?
There is a way out, but it requires us to recognize this is now a global movement. It's not just, by the way, in this region. If you talk to Nigerians at the moment, Kenyans at the moment, people in Somalia, people in the Central Asia, they've got the same problem. Very briefly, we have to take whatever security measures we take, and those are important. But my view is the fundamental long-term question is we have to educate our young people and insist as a global responsibility that education systems educate young people for an open-minded and tolerant view of the world and not a narrow-minded view.
All right.
And that's the root of the problem.
Mr. Tony Blair, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.